ever had that sinking feeling when you look at your calendar and realize you have no clients lined up next month? Or found yourself accepting work that you really didn't want because your pipeline was empty and you needed to pay the bills? My guest today has a solution that is deceptively simple, but incredibly powerful. Always maintain 10 projects in your pipeline at various stages of development. Not necessarily 10 signed contracts, but 10 potential projects, ranging from initial conversations to proposals to signed agreements. This strategy ensures you never face that panic-inducing moment of having nothing in the works. I'm AJ Riedel. This is Thriving Through, the podcast where each week I have real conversations with successful, seasoned, self-employed consultants about what it really takes to build a profitable, sustainable, and fulfilling consulting practice. Today, I'm talking with Bob Greene, principal consultant at RCG Workgroup, who specializes in business development and leadership strategy with a neuroscience-based approach to sales training. Bob's been through something that many consultants fear the most: losing a major revenue source. When the government shutdown hit, it devastated his business. But instead of giving up, Bob used this setback to refine his systems and build an even stronger foundation for his consulting practice. In this conversation, Bob shares the exact strategies he's using to rebuild, including that 10 project pipeline methodology. He'll review how he uses freelance platforms like Upwork to build credibility and test market rates, and why he structures his business to never depend on one client for more than 20% of his revenue. If you're struggling with inconsistent income, an empty pipeline, or you're trying to recover from your own business disruption, this episode will give you practical, actionable strategies. Let's dive in. Welcome to this episode of the Thriving Through podcast. Today, my guest is Bob Greene. Bob, I'm delighted to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, AJ. I'm excited to be here.
I have a question about the title. As you know, the title of the podcast is called Thriving Through. What does thriving mean to you, and is your consulting practice thriving?
Well, thriving for me means doing what I want, when I want, on my own terms. It's not necessarily monetarily driven. It's more about freedom of movement and only having to answer to myself. And is my practice thriving right now? The answer is no, but it's being positioned back to thriving. I got hit hard with the government shutdown, and I'm implementing some strategies to build back up.
Wonderful. And we'll talk more about that because I'm eager to know what you're doing to build back up. And we may have a surprise visit from Leo the cat in this interview. So those of you
Leo
who are
is
cat
sitting on my
lovers,
lap. Yeah, he's quietly sitting on my lap right now, but he might look around in a few minutes.
yes, when he realizes that he's missing out on the interview.
Yeah, so if he doesn't show up, we won't be disappointed.
So, Bob, what was your path to becoming a self-employed consultant?
So my career started in sales, and then as I moved into sales management, I would hire sales trainers to come in and train my team. And I realized even though the training was impactful in the moment, it didn't move the needle over time. So within 30 days, my team was back to doing their old bad habits. And I wasn't really able to manage any outcomes from the training because there was no real accountability baked into those trainings. So I started doing research, which I'm prone to do, and I started studying adult learning theory to see how people learn. And I started studying neuroscience to see how our brain adapts to new challenges. And what I realized is training doesn't work for three reasons. One, it's not customized to the organization. The trainers who I hired would come in and they'd have their book and they say, hey, follow my process. and it wasn't customized to our organization. The second thing was it wasn't individualized to each learner. So the learners were, being challenged with, hey, follow my process, but why is that important to them individually? And then finally, there was no accountability to make sure that what was taught was implemented. So I started looking around at what I could do to overcome something called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, which stipulates within an hour of learning something, you forget 50%, within a day, you forget 70%, with a week, you forget 90%. And I'm sorry, if I'm paying for training, I don't want just a 10% return on my investment. So,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
I started implementing some philosophies that aligned with my objectives, and they were becoming very effective for my team. And then I started testing them with other organizations who asked me, hey, can you help me out here? And I found that I was very good at the training I was doing because here's Leo.
Hi,
I was
Leo.
very good at the training I was doing because it was outcome based. There was a performance metric at the end, which gave you a way to quantify your ROI. And so I moved into the sales training space. And what I realized is when I was being brought into an organization that required sales training, a lot of times that training expanded beyond just sales to organizational development, which I have a background in. And now I'm coaching CEOs and I'm, reorganizing management teams. And so I realized that one of the things that was a direct offshoot of the sales training was leadership development within an organization. And so I got additional credentials there. I took some certificate programs from MIT Sloan School and then Wharton from University of Pennsylvania to build my credentials in that space. And then in addition to that, I also do conflict resolution because anytime you're implementing change as a change management consultant, I don't like to use the word change because it implies that what preceded it was wrong. And I want to keep those people allied to what I'm doing. So I have three buckets of expertise now. I have anything in the sales enablement space, I do leadership development, and I do conflict resolution. And a lot of times that manifests itself as being an immersive leader with an organization rather than just doing training or outside consulting.
And what do you mean by immersive leader?
So I'll take on the role of like vice president or vice president of sales, and I'll go in and I'll run the team, I'll run the metrics, I'll hold people accountable, I'll hold myself accountable, and we'll do quantifiable and measurable results, improving sales processes, actually identifying if it's a sales process or if it's personality driven. A lot of times in organizations, it's a personality driven process that is dependent on the leader. And if something happens to the leader, then everything else shuts down. And so I want to make sure it's a process that's sustainable outside of any direct individual contribution.
Got it. So you go in. So does that mean you work with one client at a time?
I can manage up to 5 clients at a time. I have a team that I work with that supports me as needed. I call them my work group experts from my company, RCG Workgroup. And these are people who have expertise that either complements mine or duplicates mine, depending on my bandwidth or the needs. I have people in financial services and technology and marketing and strategic communication, and I'll bring them on a contract basis as needed to support a client. So I have enough bandwidth to manage 5 clients effectively at any one time.
Okay. And how many do you have right now?
Right now, I have 2, and I'm looking to build back up because, like I said, I got hit hard with the government. And what happened was I got a little bit lazy because I had these nice government contracts as a sub for different organizations, and so it was taking my bandwidth in terms of delivery, so I wasn't doing the business development that I should be doing. And so when Doge hit, that was the first notice. Like, okay, like 70% of my business was government at that point. I said, this isn't good. And I was doing a lot of leadership development. And so I hired a marketing company to pivot back into the private sector. And I figured I have enough bandwidth to run out the year so that I can start building business in 2026. And then when the government shut down, I got caught flat-footed. And thankfully, that's what savings are for, to sustain you through difficult times. And I'm just now starting to build back income that is from new clients in terms of different outreach and different things that I was doing six months, 8 months ago are now starting to come to fruition.
Okay. Yeah, 6 to 8. So you recognize this mid-year or early year last year and started to do some marketing, and it's taken this long
Yeah.
for it to come to fruition.
Because typically what happens, especially when it comes to my field, it's budget dependent. And a lot of times budgets are already formed in the first quarter. And I started my marketing in Q2. So even though I had a lot of interest, I didn't have a lot of budget to support what I was doing. And it wasn't that I would say that my services were nice to have, not need to have. But as the
Mhm.
year progressed and people didn't hit their financial goals that they wanted to, they started looking again at the services I could offer. So now I'm having, I'm actually contracting with organizations or having more earnest conversations about moving forward so we can contract in Q1.
Got it. So things are looking up.
Yes, very much so.
So you hired a marketing firm to help you with your marketing. What are they doing? Well, first question is, why did you hire a marketing firm? And then what did you look for in a marketing firm?
So I hired a marketing firm simply for bandwidth because I didn't have the bandwidth to do the direct cold calling for building out my clientele. And I didn't want to purchase a list because I wasn't, how do I say it? I wanted to make sure that I was getting warm leads and not cold leads. So what this marketing company does, it's a performance-based outcome. I don't pay for it unless they bring me a lead. And they would bring me a lead. I'd have a conversation with that lead, see if it was a good fit. And if we both agreed to move forward, then I would pay for the lead. And
Okay.
one of the things that I figured out, um, not as soon as I would have liked, is I was accepting leads from startup companies. And they have a tremendous amount of need, but not a lot of bandwidth financially. And they're also very volatile. They have to reach out to their backers for support. And so even though I have a pipeline of startup companies, they weren't monetizing. And so I said, okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to readjust my ideal customer profile and take startups out of the mix because like I said, they have tremendous need, but they just don't have the bandwidth. So my ideal customer profile is a company in the 10 to $20 million range that is looking to get to the next level, recognizing that what got them to where they are isn't going to get them to the next level. And what's interesting is in two cases where I went in and provided my consultancy and recommended to these were single owner, basically entrepreneurial startups that have built to a level where they have like 50 to 100 employees. And I said to the owner, I said, you need to start working on the business instead of in the business, start becoming more strategic, start learning to delegate. And in two cases, the owner says, you know what? I'm good at 10 million. I don't want to change the way I'm doing things. And that was
Mhm.
fine. That was absolutely fine. But if my focus is on growth companies and helping them adjust their metrics to get to the next level, I'll do compensation planning, I'll do reorganization, I'll build out a middle management if that's needed. And so I have all that capability, but sometimes change is too hard for these owners and they just say, you know what, I'm good where I am. And I said, that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. So
Right.
it has to be growth oriented, but then if it is, then I can be more effective.
So I'm curious. So you've got your ideal client pretty well defined, but one of the factors is that they're recognizing that what got them here isn't going to get them to the next level. How does your marketing company determine that when they're looking for leads?
So my stipulation is as once we took startups out of the equation, what they do is they look for companies at a certain threshold of business, and then they'll go and interview that company to see if they are in a growth mode. And if they're in a growth mode, then they refer that lead to me to see if that's a company I want to work with. So they do the qualification. It's not just they're giving me a name from a list. They actually call ahead, quantify the lead, and send it to me. So I'm getting marketing qualified leads. And then it's just a question of whether I think it's a good fit from which to move forward.
And you do that in like a short chemistry call kind
Yeah, I
of
will do a
thing.
discovery call for about half an hour just to see what they're looking to accomplish. I'll share what I can offer. We'll go over, basically the BANT, budget, authority, need, and time. And what typically happens with the startups They checked all the boxes, but the budget became suspect because they didn't control their budget. So they said, yeah, we have the funding. And then you come back and say, well, our ownership doesn't want to spend, our backers don't want to spend this, or whatever it might be. So that's okay. And I might still work with them, but I needed to get lower hanging fruit. So that's why I stopped working with the startups.
Right, right. What else do you do in the area of marketing?
Myself, in terms of outreach, I have a website that the SEO that we've put into the website. It's taken about a year to start getting leads, but I get good quality leads through my website as well because of the SEO. And it's always, whenever I ask, how did you find me? Now people, they're not using Google, they're using AI to search. And they're saying, yeah, you came up in ChatGPT. And I said, oh. Okay. And I didn't realize SEO applied to AI, and I have to look into that further. But most people today, if they're doing a search, they're not using Google.
That's right. Yeah, the AI, it's AIO or AEO, I guess it is. Um, a yeah, AI optimization, and it's the one click where they don't even go to your website. They just
Right.
look at the summary on AI on ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot or Gemini, and they make a decision right from there, which is
So,
kind of a scary prospect when you think about all the time and effort we put into our websites.
well, what I found, which is meaningful, I update my website constantly with new content. I have a blog that I'm constantly writing towards. And I've learned a couple things where I used to post on LinkedIn and then archive on my website. Now I post on my website, go to LinkedIn with a backlink. So I'll give you a teaser of the article, and then you have to click the link to read it. So it drives my SEO. But in the process of doing that, those backlinks are what the AI notices.
Good. That makes sense. Yeah, this is a really nitty gritty, but when you do the link in LinkedIn, do you do it in the post or do you do it as a comment?
I tend to do it in the post. I know that there's recommendations to do either. I find if I do it in the post and somebody wants to share the post, it's more readily
There,
distributed than
yes.
if it's in the comments.
And you're still getting good impressions
Yeah, I typically, it's like the impressions differ from the likes. So I might get like 20 likes, but I'll get like 800 impressions. And the algorithm in LinkedIn is constantly changing. What I look at when somebody likes a post, I say, okay, are they first level contacts or second level? And if they're second level, then I look at their profile to see why they're looking. And I won't necessarily reach out to connect with them, but I'll
Mhm.
follow them. And then typically they'll follow me and they'll say, hey, thanks for following me. I see your, whatever, it's interesting, and then let's connect. And I've used LinkedIn for lead generation before. It's very effective if you do it the right way, but I don't like these unsolicited, hey, I looked at your website and we have a lot in common kind of outreaches.
Yeah,
You get a lot of that. And I typically turn down more requests to connect than I accept. And just organically, I have over 13,000 connections on LinkedIn.
yeah. Sounds like you're when we talked earlier, you said that you weren't as happy with LinkedIn now.
I think the content has devolved. It's more like Facebook, where like you have the humble brags, you have the outright solicitations. Hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. You have the personal celebrations. I like to post content that is educational. That yes, at some point it's not altruistic, it's self-serving. I want people to come back to my website, but I want to educate people. I want to give them insight and understanding on something that's interesting to me. I don't just want to do, hey, I'm going to be over here at whatever institution leading or taking a picture of hey, I just finished this training. I tend not to do that. I mean, I did that. I was guilty of it. But when I look at what Facebook is, you're hard pressed to find somebody who's creating content that's meaningful. Most of it is self-serving, humble bragging, or solicitations. and it looks a lot like Facebook.
which is sad.
Well, LinkedIn I think, is still a great engine. But when you have people posting memes of like, like Happy Monday, like I don't need to see that. I mean, it's not meaningful to me. And I appreciate people want to celebrate their successes, and that's great. I mean, if you finished a course and you want to send it out there. One of the things that embarrasses me, if you want to add something to your profile, LinkedIn automatically wants to publish it, and sometimes I don't hit the button the right way, and next thing you know, I'm getting all these celebration things saying, "Hey, congratulations, congratulations!" I'm like, I don't want that. I just wanted to post it quietly to my profile and leave it alone. So, yeah, LinkedIn's all right, but it could be better.
Yeah. Um, oh, I had a thought and I just forgot what I was going to say.
Leo, do you have anything you want to add?
I want to go back to neuroscience and adult learning theory and how you have woven that into making training. And it sounds like you started with sales training, but now you've branched into leadership development, which is a training of sorts. Um, so tell me more about that whole neuroscience and adult learning theory area.
Okay. In instructional design, they have a process called the ADDIE model, and it's basically you do analysis, design, develop, implement, and then evaluate. And what I do when I go into an organization is I do an assessment. I don't just say, "Hey, here's my training." Here's my book. I do an assessment of what their needs are. And then I customize the learning to the individual organization so that they can use the deck afterwards as a how-to book. And so my decks are content rich, but I don't read the decks when I make the presentation. I treat the presentation like a podcast where I talk about the deck, but I don't read it. And what I do though is they now have a customized learning model that they can cut and paste and do whatever they want with. They own it. They pay me enough. I don't charge a licensing fee. So they own the deck. Then what I do is I figured out, how do I individualize? I'm giving you all my secret sauce, but that's okay. How do I individualize the learning? And what I do is I say to people, look, there's a lot of content here. I don't expect you to remember all of it, but pick three things that are meaningful to you that are also beneficial to your organization that you'll be willing to implement and activate immediately upon conclusion of the training. The act of selection forces them to pay greater attention than they would if they were trying to remember everything. And the three things that they select individualize the learning to their level of competency. So somebody who's highly knowledgeable in an area will pick three different things than somebody who's not. Somebody who's novice will pick something else. And then what I do is I take those three things and I say, okay, we're going to share these with your manager. And what I do is I train the trainer when I'm in an organization so the manager knows how to measure the metrics. And I found it takes about 120 days to create a new habit. And so what we'll do is we'll do 30, 60, 90, and 120-day check-ins to ensure that what was being taught is being implemented so that by day 120, they're consciously unconscious in that skill. And now you actually have a definable, measurable outcome from which you can evaluate return on investment because you've moved the needle on these three things for each individual. And then what we can do at 120 days, which I've done before, I go back and I do a refresher and they pick three more things and we start
Mm.
the process over again.
So it works in 120-day cycles, and you could theoretically be with the company for a number of years
Well, it
in
could
those four
become
month cycles.
evergreen. I have a different philosophy of my consultancy. Some consultants say, give them 80%, keep them coming back for more, and hold that 20% to keep yourself on a residual retainer. I give them 110%, teach them how to, I train the trainer, teach them how to be self-sufficient, and then move on. It's not that I don't care about the residual model. I'm too ADD to stay in one place at one time. So I will give them, and people will call me back and say, hey, can you come in and do a refresher? I go, absolutely. But it's not a built-in model where I say, okay, and every 120 days I come back. I say, if they want me to, that's great. And if they don't, that's okay too, because by that point, I've trained them how to take the content that I've given them, repurpose it, and then, basically create that process internally where they don't need to keep paying me as an outside consultant.
And you move on to another company that needs you.
Yeah, pretty much.
So do you feel like you've got the momentum going, so you're going to be thriving again?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm having fun. I just I read an article about a company that intrigued me about 2 weeks ago. I read an article about a company. I reached out through their website. The CEO got back to me because I had an insight for how they can pivot their business from they're in the consumer space, and I see that they have a real potential in the commercial space. And he was intrigued by that. So I just flew out to Phoenix to meet with the CEO and his executive team, and I'm going to be representing that company domestically for their sales. So it's an international company, and they were in town for a conference and said, "Hey, can you get out here?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll be there." So that's the kind of stuff I like to do. I'm not, like I said, the money comes after you have the relationship. If you start with trying to make the money, I don't think, at least I wouldn't be as effective. I like to build a relationship first and then see how it can monetize.
That's very important in the consulting space.
For me, it is. I mean, there's other consultants out there who can buy and sell me, who look at me like, oh no, just go after the money. You're in sales, sell stuff. And I said, okay. But at the end of the day, I really feel like I'm helping people. I'm contributing to a better world by the work I do. And yes, I get compensated for it. It's not like a charitable endeavor, but I'm doing it in a way that I feel good about my efforts.
Yep. I want to switch gears and look to a little bit further ahead future. So I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are you ahead or behind where you wanted to be by now?
Well, I was ahead, but I'm not right now. So I got to get
Okay,
back to being ahead. So I look at it as, like in a football game, you got the back and forth. So it's halftime and I'm behind, but I still have a whole nother half to make up. And I'm very confident in my game plan.
very good, good. Well, and hopefully you're not like I'm a big Packers fan, and the Packers in the last half of the season would be doing gangbusters in the first half, and then they would just like completely, if there were a turnover or a fumble, they would just completely fall apart in the second half. So
Well, you have to be resilient. You have to be
yes,
resilient. Did you watch the Indiana Miami game last night for the college national championship?
I did not. My husband was watching part of it, but I did not.
It was so impressive. This team went 16-0, won the national championship from Indiana, which never won anything in football. And it was just basically, hey, you make a mistake, figure it out, move on. And they don't dwell on their mistakes and they focus on, the team. And it was such an inspirational game to watch. I just, kudos to Indiana. That
It,
was
they
great.
they have done amazing. That there will be case studies written about this coach that's come
Yeah,
in.
Signetti, yeah. But he
Yeah,
used to be at
absolutely.
James Madison University, which is a school here in Virginia. And I graduated from Virginia Tech, and we always pride ourselves on being some sort of a football powerhouse. And we haven't been a football powerhouse in like 20 years. And we get beat by schools like James Madison on a fairly routine basis. And James Madison, where Signetti coached before, was in the national championship mix this year. They actually made it into that selected playoff. So James Madison's doing some cool stuff too, and that's the legacy of Signetti. So I love that when he went to Indiana and he said, why not Indiana for a national championship? And the press was asking questions. Says, "I win. You can Google it." So I love the confidence. I love that.
Yes, yes. Do you have that kind of confidence in your consulting?
I do. I'm very confident that when I go into an organization, I can affect the meaningful directional pivot. I don't like to call it change, the directional pivot that the organization wants to achieve. And I have measurable results. I worked with one credit union that they were moving their team from farmers to hunters, where they were basically before they were answering the phone, now they were out in the field engaging with their membership, and they were doing an abysmal job. So I secret shopped them to where they were doing their lunch and learns and whatnot. Came back to management with observations that, hey, your team is awful, but the good news is they're coachable. And we identified what we wanted to coach, and that same team, without a change in headcount, went from 800,000 to 7 million in 9 months.
Wow. Nice. It's in Indiana
Yeah. But
under
this is
Bob
this is
Greene.
the thing that I find is most times consultants have a methodology that they use. And my methodology is essentially agnostic to whatever methodology an organization is using, and I'm a catalyst to make what they do better. I don't come in saying, this is my approach. I say, hey, this is what's worked for me, but let's see what you're doing. And that way it's easier to assimilate people to the process that you want them to have if it's something that's familiar. And you can migrate them into accountability, where that is probably what's missing in most organizations. Like, for instance, what you measure. One of the things that I find very frustrating is a manager will find it very easy to measure how many calls his salespeople make, how many meetings they have. But those are artificial metrics that don't indicate performance, because how many calls you make doesn't show you're moving the needle to those calls becoming discovery meetings. And those discovery meetings aren't, showing, are they migrating to presentations or demonstrations or whatever it might be. So you have to quantify the metrics that you're measuring to make sure that the metrics matter. And what happens in a lot of cases when I start exposing the artificial nature of those metrics, people end up leaving the organization because they don't want to be held accountable to real standards.
Mhm.
And when you start holding people accountable, that's when organizations can grow. And you do it in a way that's positive, not punitive, but you still have to be accountable.
Where do you see your practice in the next 3 to 5 years?
I am very excited about working with international companies that want a footprint here in the US. I've got a nice pipeline of those organizations that I'm working with now, and I see myself maybe even taking on like an actual employee role if the position is big enough, where I would take over US or North American operations from a sales and marketing perspective.
While still keeping your consulting practice going?
Um, Yes and no. I mean, it depends. At that point, how much bandwidth it's taking. The other thing is I have kids who might be interested in coming into my business, so that's another thing that I have a daughter who's very accomplished, but she's happy as a director with her current company. But as I start to migrate, if I start to migrate out of my current role, the business is if the business is still viable, she might want to take that on because it gives her the freedom of movement. That she's got young kids, so it would give her the flexibility of being more at home with her kids and having to be, in her organization. So I have that potential. But I really, how do I say? I have a map, but you know how like when you have a GPS, it gives you 15 different routes to get to your destination. That's
Mhm.
kind of where I am. I know where I want to go. I don't quite know how I'm going to get there yet.
And then so you start on one of the routes and you take the wrong turn and it reroutes,
Pretty much.
finds a
Yeah,
new route.
there's no anxiety, it's like, and if you look back on your career, most people don't have a straight line anyway. I mean, it looks
Right.
straight in retrospect, but while you're going, it's all over the place. But you realize there are certain anchor points within your career that you build from to the next level. And when I look back at my career, where I started and where I am seems like a natural progression. It didn't feel like it at the time, but in retrospect, it definitely was.
Well, as we start to close up the podcast, this interview, I have a couple final questions.
Sure.
What's one book, podcast, or resource that's been invaluable to your consulting practice?
Lately I read a book called by Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference. And Chris Voss is an FBI negotiator, hostage negotiator. who has a different approach to negotiation, where my whole career was trained to get people to say yes. He wants them to say no.
Hmm.
And he wants them to say no because he looks at it as a source of empowerment. So rather than say, would it be a good idea for us to move forward? His approach is, would it be a terrible idea if we move this forward? And when you ask, would it be a terrible idea? And somebody says no, the actor saying no gives them a sense of empowerment, even though they're agreeing with what you want them to do. Now they feel like they're in control. And the other thing I really liked about his approach is when you're confronted with somebody pushing back against what you want to do, like in a negotiation, there's a give and take. I love his response of, how am I supposed to do that? And by asking, how am I supposed to do that? It forces the other party to become part of the problem solution rather than just the problem. Now they have to invest in telling you how you can do that. And by investing in telling you how to do that, they are now becoming empathetic to your position and aligning with you, even though they don't realize it. So there's some brilliant stuff there. So it's Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference.
Wonderful. I will put it on my reading list. What's one piece of advice you wish someone had given you when you started consulting?
Have more in the bank. You need, if you're going to do this in earnest, I don't want to discourage people from going out on their own, but if you don't have a safety buffer, it's going to be very stressful for you. So make sure you're doing it with some funds in the bank and make sure you're doing it because you're compelled to do it. I don't think anybody goes into consulting on their own or business on their own because they want to. I think there's some sort of an incident that occurs that forces their hand. In my case, I got tired of I would overperform my sales plans, and I got tired of having my commissions reduced because I was making too much money. So I said, you know what, I'm done with this. And so I started picking up contracts on my own. The other thing that I would recommend for people who are getting started is look at places like Upwork, where you can do gig work to test before you actually make the commitment. You can see what your value is in the marketplace. And I'll caution people who use Upwork, it's not about how much money you make, it's the 5-star reviews. That's the currency of the realm. So if you go on my Upwork, I've made about $10,000, no, about $15,000 on Upwork without really trying. But what I did was I started off with a consultancy at $25 an hour, okay, which is like significantly below my rate. But I wanted to get the 5-star reviews. So people would hire me, they give me the 5-star reviews, and then I'd double my rate. And I'd double my rate. So now I think I reduced it because I wanted to see, get started again. But I was at a place on Upwork where I was not getting anybody reaching out to me unless they were very serious because my hourly rate was so high. And then those contracts typically were like $3,000 and $4,000 for Upwork work versus, $150 to $200. But I did the $150 to $200 work to get the 5-star reviews because I have a 5-star review across all my reviews. So I have a perfect score. And
Mm,
that's impressive if you're going to use that medium, understand the currency of the realm.
makes sense. And this final question is the most important question. How can listeners connect with you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
Probably the easiest way is through my LinkedIn profile. I don't know if you're going to post that, but it's RC Bob Greene because Bob Greene is a pretty ubiquitous name. So I put RC, my initial. So it's Romeo Charlie, RC Bob Greene, Greene, on LinkedIn. And that's the easiest way to reach me.
Okay. And that link will be in the show notes for those of you who are listening. So, Bob, thank you for being my guest today. It was thought provoking and illuminating. And there, Leo makes a last appearance as we say goodbye. So, thank you so much for being my guest. And for those of you listening, until next time, keep thriving through.
Thank you.
I hope Bob's Green story reminds you that setbacks don't have to mean the end of your consulting business. They can actually become the catalyst for building something stronger and more sustainable. If you take just one thing away from this conversation, let it be the 10 project pipeline strategy. Start today by listing every potential opportunity you have, from the person you had coffee with last week to that proposal you sent out to the contact you're negotiating with. If you don't have 10 prospects on that list, you know exactly what your priority needs to be: filling that pipeline. And remember Bob's advice about having a financial buffer before you make the leap to consulting, or building a financial buffer as quickly as possible if you're already self employed. That cushion isn't just about surviving the lean months, it's about giving yourself permission to say no to wrong fit clients and yes to opportunities that truly align with your expertise and values. Bob's willingness to share his challenges alongside his strategies is what makes this conversation so valuable. We're all figuring this out as we go, learning from setbacks and finding our own path to building a consulting business that works for us. You can connect with Bob on LinkedIn or learn more about his work at RCG Workgroup. These links are in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep thriving through.